Have you ever wondered why the most powerful being ever created, second only to God himself, would risk everything in a rebellion that he knew he could never win? Why would Lucifer, the morning star, the anointed cherub who walked among the stones of fire, throw away his exalted position for what seems like an impossible victory against the Almighty? Tonight, we're about to uncover one of history's most deliberately concealed truths. A revelation so profound that it has been systematically buried by religious institutions, academic authorities, and those who benefit from keeping humanity ignorant of the real forces that shaped our existence. What I'm about to share with you isn't just another theological discussion. This is forbidden knowledge that challenges everything you thought you knew about the nature of reality, the origin of evil, and the true purpose behind creation itself. The story you've been told about Lucifer's fall is incomplete, sanitized, stripped of the terrifying details that would fundamentally alter how you understand the cosmic battle raging around us every single day. The ancient texts contain accounts so shocking, so detailed in their descriptions of what really happened before the foundation of the world, that they were deliberately excluded from mainstream religious doctrine. Picture this scenario. You're standing in the throne room of the Most High, surrounded by beings of pure light, whose very existence radiates power beyond human comprehension. The air itself seems to sing with harmonies that shake the foundations of reality. And there, closest to the throne, stands a being so magnificent that his beauty defies description. His name was Lucifer, and he was perfect in all his ways from the day he was created. But something went wrong, terribly, catastrophically wrong. And the ripple effects of what happened in those moments before time began are still shaking our world today. This isn't mythology or religious folklore. These were detailed records maintained by beings who witnessed events that predate human history. Accounts that describe the inner workings of heaven, the hierarchy of angelic beings, and the specific reasons why the most beautiful creature ever made chose to rebel against his creator. The ancient manuscripts speak of knowledge that Lucifer possessed, secrets about God's ultimate plan that drove him to make a choice that would damn him for eternity. But here's what they never taught you in Sunday school. According to these suppressed texts, Lucifer's rebellion wasn't born from simple pride or jealousy. It was a calculated response to a revelation so shocking that it split heaven itself. A divine decree that would fundamentally alter the nature of existence and force every created being to choose sides in a war that would span millennia. The forbidden manuscripts describe the moment when God announced his intention to create humanity. But this wasn't just about making another species of intelligent beings. This was about something far more profound, something that would challenge the very foundation of the angelic hierarchy. God declared that these new creatures, formed from dust, would be given something that even the highest angels had never possessed. Pause for a moment and consider the implications. If beings of pure spirit, creatures who had existed in the presence of God since the beginning, were suddenly told that mortals made of clay would receive privileges they had never been granted, how would that feel? What would drive the most perfect being ever created to risk everything in opposition to his maker? The ancient texts reveal that Lucifer knew something the other angels didn't understand. He had been given prophetic insight into God's ultimate plan for humanity, and what he saw there filled him with such horror and rage that he chose eternal damnation over submission. These weren't the temper tantrums of a spoiled angel. This was a being who understood the cosmic implications of what God intended to do. and he decided that the cost was too high. But the mystery deepens when we examine the specific timing of this rebellion. The manuscripts describe how Lucifer waited. He didn't rebel immediately upon hearing God's announcement. Instead, he observed. He planned. He began to gather intelligence about exactly what these new creatures would become and what role they would play in the divine economy. And what he discovered drove him to a conclusion that would reshape the entire cosmic order. According to these suppressed accounts, Lucifer uncovered evidence that humanity wasn't just another creation. They were intended to be something unprecedented in the history of existence. God planned to incarnate himself as one of them, to become flesh, to experience limitation, suffering, and even death. And through this incarnation, he would offer these dust-formed creatures a path to divinity that had never been available to angels. Can you imagine the shock? The being who had stood closest to the throne, who had been the covering cherub, who had walked among the stones of fire in perfect communion with the Almighty, discovered that mortals would be offered adoption as sons and daughters of God himself. They would inherit the kingdom. They would sit on thrones. They would judge angels. This revelation explains why Lucifer's rebellion took the form it did. He wasn't simply trying to overthrow God out of wounded pride. He was attempting to prevent what he saw as the greatest injustice in cosmic history. In his mind, he was fighting to preserve the natural order, to maintain the hierarchy that had existed since the beginning of time. Angels were spirit beings, eternal and powerful. Humans were temporary, finite, made from dirt. How could they possibly be elevated above creatures who had served faithfully for eons? The forbidden texts describe how Lucifer began his campaign of recruitment among the angelic hosts. This wasn't a sudden mutiny. It was a carefully orchestrated movement that took advantage of the questions and doubts that God's announcement had planted in angelic minds. 1/3 of heaven's armies would eventually join his cause, convinced by arguments that seemed logical, even righteous from their perspective. But here's where the narrative takes a turn that explains why these details have been systematically suppressed throughout history. The manuscripts reveal that Lucifer's rebellion wasn't just about opposing God's plan for humanity. It was about exposing what he believed were flaws in God's character itself. He accused the Almighty of favoritism, of changing the rules arbitrarily, of creating beings destined for privileges that their nature couldn't possibly justify. These weren't the accusations of a simple rebel. They were theological arguments that struck at the very heart of divine justice and mercy. Lucifer was essentially putting God on trial, challenging his fitness to rule based on what appeared to be preferential treatment for inferior beings. And the terrifying thing is that his arguments were sophisticated enough to convince billions of angels that he might be right. The ancient accounts describe the moment when this cosmic legal case reached its climax. Lucifer demanded a hearing before the assembled hosts of heaven. He presented his evidence, laid out his case against God's proposed elevation of humanity, and called for a vote of no confidence in the divine administration. What happened next would determine the fate of every created being and set the stage for the spiritual warfare that continues to this day. But God's response wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of defending his decisions or explaining his reasoning, he did something that shocked both the loyal angels and the rebels. He allowed the rebellion to proceed. He permitted Lucifer and his followers to leave heaven, to establish their own kingdom, and to prove their accusations against his government through practical demonstration. This wasn't defeat or weakness. It was the beginning of the most elaborate courtroom drama in cosmic history. God essentially said, "You think you can run things better? show me. And he gave Lucifer a realm to rule, subjects to govern, and time to demonstrate the superiority of his system over divine administration. The earth became the testing ground, humanity became the evidence, and every human soul became a witness in this ultimate trial. The implications are staggering. Every temptation you face, every moment of doubt, every struggle with sin isn't just personal spiritual warfare. It's part of a cosmic legal proceeding where the character of God himself is being evaluated. Lucifer isn't just trying to damn individual souls. He's trying to prove that God's system produces failure, that divine love leads to chaos, and that only his iron-fisted control can maintain order in the universe. This explains why the rebellion continues with such intensity, even though Lucifer knows he cannot ultimately win through force. He's not trying to defeat God militarily. He's trying to win the court case by demonstrating that God's methods don't work, that mercy is weakness, and that creatures given freedom will inevitably choose evil. Every human failure becomes evidence for his case. Every broken promise, every act of cruelty, every moment of despair becomes ammunition in his argument against divine character. The forbidden manuscripts reveal that this cosmic trial has multiple phases, each designed to test different aspects of God's government and character. The rebellion in heaven was phase 1. The corruption of Eden was phase 2. The flood was phase 3. And we're currently living through the final phase, where every human being must choose which system of government they believe is superior: God's kingdom of love and freedom, or Lucifer's empire of control and force. But here's what makes this moment in history so crucial. According to these ancient texts, the trial is approaching its conclusion. The evidence has been presented, the arguments have been made, and soon the cosmic jury will render its verdict. The question that will determine the fate of the universe is simple. Has God proven that love is stronger than force? That freedom produces better results than tyranny? That mercy is more effective than manipulation? The answer lies not in theological debates or philosophical arguments, but in the lived experience of humanity itself. Every act of selfless love, every moment of genuine forgiveness, every choice to do right when doing wrong would be easier becomes evidence that God's system works. Every human being who chooses light over darkness validates the divine experiment and proves Lucifer's accusations false. This is why your choices matter more than you ever imagined. This is why the battle for your soul is so intense. You're not just determining your personal destiny. You're participating in the resolution of the greatest legal case in cosmic history. Your life is evidence in a trial that will determine whether love or force will govern the universe for eternity. The forbidden history of creation isn't just about understanding the past. It's about recognizing your role in the cosmic drama that's still unfolding around you. The rebellion that began in heaven continues on earth, and every human heart becomes a battlefield where the ultimate questions of existence are being resolved. The morning star may have fallen, but his influence continues to shape the world in ways that most people never realize, and we've only begun to scratch the surface of this forbidden knowledge. The ancient texts contain details about the structure of Lucifer's kingdom, the hierarchy of fallen angels, and the specific strategies being used to influence human civilization that would shock you to your core. They describe how the rebellion has evolved, how it has adapted to different eras of human history, and how it's positioning itself for the final confrontation that will end this cosmic trial once and for all. The evidence for this cosmic conspiracy extends far deeper than most people dare to imagine. Hidden within the pages of history are accounts that reveal how Lucifer's rebellion didn't end with his expulsion from heaven. Instead, it transformed into something far more sophisticated, far more insidious than a simple war between good and evil. What emerged was a systematic campaign to corrupt the very foundations of human civilization itself. Consider the ancient civilizations that suddenly appeared across the earth with knowledge that seemed to transcend their technological capabilities. The Egyptians building pyramids with mathematical precision that modern engineers struggle to replicate. The Sumerians developing written language overnight. The builders of Stonehenge moving massive stones across impossible distances. These weren't gradual developments of human ingenuity. They were the result of forbidden knowledge being transmitted to humanity by beings who had once walked in the courts of heaven. The suppressed manuscripts describe how Lucifer's fallen angels, cast down to earth, began a program of technological and spiritual seduction. They taught humans metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics, and warfare. But more importantly, they taught them religion. Not the pure worship of the Creator, but systems of belief that would gradually turn human hearts away from their divine purpose. These weren't random acts of rebellion. This was strategic warfare designed to prove Lucifer's accusations against God's government. If he could demonstrate that humans, when given advanced knowledge and freedom to choose, would inevitably choose corruption over righteousness, he would win his cosmic case. Every pagan temple became a courthouse. Every human sacrifice became evidence. Every act of cruelty committed in the name of religion became ammunition for his argument that God's creatures were fundamentally flawed. But the fallen angels didn't stop with ancient civilizations. The forbidden texts reveal that their influence has continued through every era of human history, adapting their strategies to match the intellectual and spiritual development of each generation. What worked in Babylon required different approaches in Greece. What succeeded in Rome needed modification for medieval Europe. And what influences our modern world represents their most sophisticated campaign yet. The manuscripts describe a hierarchy of fallen beings, each with specific roles in this cosmic rebellion. At the top, directly under Lucifer himself, are the principalities and powers that Paul warned about in his letters. These beings don't concern themselves with individual temptations. They shape entire cultures, influence political systems, and guide the development of philosophies that will turn whole populations away from divine truth. Below them are the territorial spirits, fallen angels assigned to specific geographic regions and people groups. Their job is to establish spiritual strongholds that will persist for generations, creating patterns of thinking and behavior that make entire nations resistant to the gospel. The ancient texts name specific demons assigned to different kingdoms throughout history, describing how they worked through rulers and religious leaders to maintain their influence. And at the ground level are the demons that most people encounter in their daily lives. These beings don't have the power to change civilizations, but they can destroy individuals. They whisper lies in moments of weakness, amplify natural human tendencies toward selfishness and pride, and create the personal spiritual battles that every believer faces. What makes this hierarchy so effective is its coordination. The forbidden manuscripts describe regular councils where these fallen beings report to their superiors, sharing intelligence about human weaknesses and coordinating their attacks for maximum impact. They study human psychology with scientific precision, developing temptation strategies that exploit the specific vulnerabilities of different personality types, cultures, and historical periods. The ancient texts reveal that these beings possess knowledge about human nature that far exceeds our own understanding. They've been observing and manipulating human behavior since the dawn of civilization. They know which arguments will appeal to intellectuals, which emotions will drive the masses, and which fears will paralyze individuals into spiritual inaction. This isn't random evil. It's calculated spiritual warfare conducted by beings whose intelligence and experience dwarf human capabilities. But here's where the narrative takes a shocking turn that explains why this knowledge has been so carefully suppressed. The manuscripts describe how these fallen angels have infiltrated the very institutions that were supposed to protect humanity from their influence. Religious organizations, educational systems, and government structures all contain elements that serve Lucifer's purposes rather than God's kingdom. This infiltration wasn't accomplished through dramatic possessions or obvious supernatural manifestations. It was achieved through subtle influence over human pride, ambition, and the desire for power. A religious leader doesn't need to be demon-possessed to serve Satan's purposes. He just needs to be more concerned with building his own kingdom than advancing God's truth. A politician doesn't need supernatural influence to corrupt society. He just needs to prioritize personal gain over public service. The forbidden texts describe how this spiritual contamination spreads through institutions like a virus. One compromised leader influences the selection and training of his successors. Those successors carry the same spiritual priorities into their own spheres of influence. Over time, entire organizations can drift away from their original purpose, while maintaining the appearance of righteousness or public service. This explains why religious institutions that were founded to spread divine truth often become obstacles to genuine spiritual awakening. Why educational systems that were created to enlighten human minds frequently produce graduates who are more confused about fundamental truth than when they started. Why governments that were established to promote justice and protect the innocent often become instruments of oppression and corruption. The ancient manuscripts warn that this institutional infiltration would intensify as history progressed toward its climax. The closer humanity gets to the resolution of the cosmic trial, the more desperate Lucifer's forces become to prevent people from understanding their true situation. They can't afford to have humans recognize that they're participants in a cosmic legal case, rather than just struggling through meaningless existence. But the infiltration extends beyond obvious institutions of power and influence. The forbidden texts describe how fallen angels have worked to corrupt the very foundations of human knowledge itself. Science, philosophy, art, and literature have all been subtly influenced to promote worldviews that make divine truth seem impossible or irrelevant. Consider how modern science, despite its legitimate discoveries about the natural world, often presents a materialistic worldview that leaves no room for spiritual reality. This isn't because scientific evidence demands atheism. It's because the interpretation of evidence has been influenced by beings who benefit from convincing humans that nothing exists beyond the physical realm. The same pattern appears in philosophy, where brilliant human minds have developed sophisticated arguments for moral relativism, existential meaninglessness, and the impossibility of absolute truth. These aren't neutral intellectual exercises. They're weapons in a spiritual war designed to make humans doubt the very foundations of divine revelation. Even art and entertainment serve this purpose, gradually shifting cultural values away from divine principles through stories that normalize behavior that would have been considered obviously evil in previous generations. The forbidden manuscripts describe how fallen angels have worked through human creativity to reshape moral imagination, making vice appear attractive and virtue seem boring or oppressive. The coordination of this cultural warfare becomes evident when you examine how the same destructive themes appear simultaneously across different fields and geographic regions. The timing isn't coincidental. It represents the implementation of strategies developed in those demonic councils described in ancient texts. Yet the manuscripts also reveal something that provides hope in the midst of this overwhelming spiritual conspiracy. God knew exactly what Lucifer would do. Every strategy, every infiltration, every cultural corruption was anticipated and accounted for in the divine plan. The cosmic trial wasn't established because God was uncertain about the outcome. It was established to demonstrate conclusively before all created beings that love is indeed more powerful than force. The ancient texts describe how God has maintained his own network of influence throughout human history. Not through deception or manipulation, but through individuals who freely choose to align themselves with divine purposes. These people become living demonstrations that Lucifer's accusations are false, that humans can choose righteousness even when surrounded by corruption. This divine network includes obvious figures like prophets and apostles, but it extends far beyond religious leaders. Every person who chooses integrity over compromise becomes part of God's evidence in the cosmic trial. Every act of selfless love refutes Satan's claim that creatures will always choose selfishness when given freedom. Every moment of forgiveness demonstrates that mercy produces better results than vengeance. The forbidden history reveals that this battle between two kingdoms continues to intensify because the trial is approaching its conclusion. Soon the cosmic jury will have enough evidence to render a verdict that will determine the government of the universe for eternity. The question isn't whether good will ultimately triumph over evil. The question is whether individual humans will choose to be part of the evidence that validates divine love or part of the demonstration that seems to support Lucifer's accusations. This understanding transforms how we view every challenge, every temptation, and every opportunity to choose between right and wrong. We're not just making personal decisions. We're participating in the resolution of cosmic questions that have implications far beyond our individual lives. Every human heart becomes a courtroom where the character of God himself is being evaluated. The intensity of spiritual warfare in our generation makes sense when viewed through this lens. We're living in the final phase of the cosmic trial, the moment when all the evidence will be evaluated and the verdict will be announced. Lucifer knows his time is short, and he's throwing everything he has into this final campaign to prove that God's system doesn't work. But the ancient texts also reveal that this intensity works both ways. The same cosmic forces that enable unprecedented evil also make possible unprecedented demonstrations of divine power and love. The darker the darkness becomes, the brighter the light appears. The more sophisticated Satan's deceptions become, the more obvious becomes the superiority of divine truth. And this brings us to the most shocking revelation contained in these forbidden manuscripts. The cosmic trial that began with Lucifer's rebellion in heaven will end with a final demonstration so powerful, so undeniable, that every created being in the universe will see clearly which system of government produces the better results. The evidence phase is almost complete. The closing arguments are being prepared, and soon the cosmic jury will render their verdict. But before that final resolution arrives, every human being must decide which side they want their life to represent in this ultimate courtroom drama. The choice you make doesn't just determine your personal destiny. It becomes part of the evidence that will influence the government of the universe for eternity. The rebellion that shattered heaven continues on earth, but its days are numbered. The morning star may have fallen, but his influence over human civilization is about to be exposed and eliminated forever. What happens next will depend on whether humanity chooses to validate God's experiment in freedom and love, or provides the evidence that Lucifer needs to win his cosmic case against divine character. The forbidden history of creation isn't just about understanding how evil entered the world. It's about recognizing that we're living in the climactic chapters of the greatest story ever told, and every choice we make helps determine how that story ends. The evidence becomes even more disturbing when we examine how this cosmic conspiracy has infiltrated the very fabric of modern civilization. The forbidden texts describe specific strategies that Lucifer's forces have implemented to ensure that humanity remains blind to the true nature of the spiritual war raging around them. These aren't random acts of rebellion or chaotic attempts to spread evil. This is systematic psychological warfare designed to corrupt human perception of reality itself. Consider how the educational systems that shape young minds have been gradually transformed into indoctrination centers that promote spiritual blindness. Students are taught to view themselves as accidents of evolution, meaningless products of random chemical processes with no ultimate purpose or destiny. This isn't neutral education. It's strategic conditioning designed to make divine truth seem impossible or irrelevant to an entire generation. The ancient manuscripts describe how fallen angels have worked through human institutions to create what they call cognitive barriers, mental frameworks that make it psychologically difficult for people to accept spiritual realities. When someone is taught from childhood that nothing exists beyond the physical realm, when they're conditioned to dismiss anything supernatural as primitive superstition, they become resistant to the very truths that could set them free. Moses. But the manipulation goes far deeper than just academic instruction. The forbidden texts reveal how entertainment media has become one of the most powerful weapons in this spiritual war. Movies, television shows, music, and literature don't just reflect cultural values. They actively shape them, gradually moving entire populations away from divine principles through stories that normalize behavior that previous generations would have recognized as obviously destructive. This cultural programming operates through what the ancient texts describe as moral imagination. Humans make ethical decisions not just through rational analysis, but through their emotional responses to different scenarios. When entertainment consistently portrays selfishness as wisdom, revenge as justice, and rebellion as courage, it gradually reshapes how people feel about right and wrong at the deepest psychological levels. The coordination of this campaign becomes evident when you examine how the same destructive themes appear simultaneously across different forms of media and different geographic regions. The timing isn't coincidental. It represents the implementation of strategies developed in those demonic councils that the forbidden manuscripts describe in chilling detail. These councils, according to the ancient texts, operate like military command centers where fallen angels analyze human psychology, identify weaknesses in different cultures and generations, and develop targeted campaigns designed to maximize spiritual destruction. They study human behavior with scientific precision, developing temptation strategies that exploit the specific vulnerabilities of different personality types, social groups, and historical periods. What makes their approach so effective is that they don't need to convince people to consciously serve evil. They just need to gradually shift human values and priorities until people naturally make choices that serve Satan's purposes while believing they're pursuing good. A person doesn't need to worship the devil to advance his kingdom. They just need to prioritize their own desires over divine principles. The forbidden texts describe how this subtle corruption spreads through society like a spiritual virus. One compromised leader influences the selection and training of his successors. Those successors carry the same spiritual blindness into their own spheres of influence. Over time, entire institutions can drift away from their original purpose while maintaining the appearance of serving legitimate goals. This explains why organizations that were founded to promote human welfare often become instruments of control and manipulation. Why religious institutions that were established to spread divine truth frequently become obstacles to genuine spiritual awakening. Why governments that were created to protect individual freedom consistently evolve into systems of oppression and surveillance. But the ancient manuscripts reveal something even more shocking about the scope of this cosmic conspiracy. The fallen angels haven't just infiltrated human institutions. They've worked to corrupt the very foundations of human knowledge itself, creating what the texts describe as epistemic contamination, the pollution of humanity's ability to distinguish truth from falsehood. Consider how modern science, despite its legitimate discoveries about the natural world, often promotes interpretations of evidence that make divine truth seem impossible. This isn't because scientific data demands atheistic conclusions. It's because the philosophical framework used to interpret that data has been influenced by beings who benefit from convincing humans that nothing exists beyond the material realm. The same pattern appears in philosophy, where brilliant human minds develop sophisticated arguments for moral relativism, existential meaninglessness, and the impossibility of absolute truth. These aren't neutral intellectual exercises. They're weapons in a spiritual war designed to make humans doubt the very possibility of divine revelation. Even fields like psychology and sociology have been subtly influenced to promote worldviews that make spiritual realities seem like psychological disorders or cultural constructs. The forbidden texts describe how fallen angels have worked through human academic institutions to pathologize genuine spiritual experiences while normalizing behaviors that previous generations recognized as obviously destructive to human flourishing. The coordination of this intellectual warfare becomes evident when you examine how the same destructive ideas appear simultaneously across different academic disciplines and cultural contexts. The timing and consistency suggest implementation, coordinated strategies, rather than independent human discoveries. Yet the manuscripts also reveal that this campaign of deception contains the seeds of its own exposure. The more sophisticated Satan's lies become, the more obvious become their contradictions with observable reality. The more aggressively human institutions promote spiritual blindness, the more apparent becomes their failure to deliver the peace and fulfillment they promise. The ancient texts describe how God has anticipated every strategy that Lucifer would use in this cosmic trial. Every deception, every infiltration, every cultural corruption was foreseen and accounted for in the divine plan. The cosmic trial wasn't established because God was uncertain about the outcome. It was designed to demonstrate conclusively before all created beings that truth is more powerful than deception and love more effective than manipulation. This divine anticipation explains why genuine spiritual awakening often emerges from the most unlikely sources. People who have been thoroughly indoctrinated by corrupted institutions suddenly experience revelations that completely transform their understanding of reality. Individuals who seemed completely resistant to spiritual truth undergo dramatic conversions that shock everyone who knows them. The forbidden manuscripts describe how God maintains his own network of influence throughout human history, not through deception or manipulation, but through individuals who freely choose to seek truth regardless of social pressure or institutional indoctrination. These people become living demonstrations that Lucifer's accusations about human nature are false. This divine network includes obvious figures like prophets and evangelists, but it extends far beyond religious leaders. Every person who chooses integrity over compromise becomes part of God's evidence in the cosmic trial. Every scientist who follows evidence wherever it leads, even when it challenges materialistic assumptions, refutes Satan's claim that intellectual honesty is impossible. Every artist who creates beauty that points toward transcendent truth demonstrates that human creativity can serve divine purposes rather than just selfish ones. The forbidden texts reveal that this battle between truth and deception intensifies as the cosmic trial approaches its conclusion. We're living in what the ancient manuscripts describe as the final evidence-gathering phase, the period when all the arguments will be presented and evaluated before the cosmic jury renders its verdict. This explains why spiritual warfare has become so intense in our generation. Lucifer knows that his time to influence the outcome of the trial is running short. He's throwing everything he has into this final campaign to prove that God's system of government doesn't work, that creatures given freedom will inevitably choose corruption over righteousness. But the same cosmic forces that enable unprecedented deception also make possible unprecedented demonstrations of divine power and truth. The darker the spiritual darkness becomes, the brighter genuine light appears by contrast. The more sophisticated Satan's lies become, the more obvious becomes the superiority of divine truth to those who genuinely seek it. The ancient texts describe signs that would indicate when this final phase of the cosmic trial was reaching its climax. Widespread spiritual deception that would be so sophisticated it could deceive even sincere believers if they relied only on their own understanding. Political and social chaos that would make people desperate for authoritarian solutions. Environmental and economic crises that would create conditions ripe for the emergence of a global dictator who would promise to solve all problems through centralized control. But alongside these signs of Satan's final campaign, the manuscripts describe corresponding signs of God's preparation for the trial's conclusion. Spiritual revivals that would emerge in the most unlikely places. Scientific discoveries that would make divine design increasingly obvious despite institutional resistance. Technologies that would make it possible for divine truth to spread rapidly across the entire world, despite official censorship. The coordination of these competing campaigns becomes evident when you examine current world events through the lens of cosmic trial, rather than just human politics. Every crisis becomes an opportunity for either side to present evidence supporting their vision of how the universe should be governed. Every human response to these crises becomes testimony in the ultimate courtroom drama. What makes this moment in history so crucial is that we're approaching what the forbidden texts describe as the point of no return. Soon the evidence phase of the cosmic trial will be complete. The closing arguments will be presented, and the cosmic jury will render their verdict about which system of government will rule the universe for eternity. But before that final resolution arrives, every human being must decide which side they want their life to represent in this ultimate legal proceeding. The choice isn't just about personal salvation or individual spiritual experience. It's about participating in the resolution of cosmic questions that will determine the character of existence itself for all created beings. The forbidden manuscripts make clear that this choice cannot be postponed indefinitely. The window of opportunity to influence the outcome of the cosmic trial is closing. Soon, the evidence will be evaluated, the arguments will be heard, and the verdict will be announced. When that happens, the spiritual warfare that has raged since Lucifer's rebellion will finally end, but the consequences of the trial's outcome will shape reality for eternity. The intensity of current spiritual battles makes sense when viewed through this cosmic perspective. We're not just dealing with personal temptations or cultural conflicts. We're living through the climactic chapters of the greatest legal case in universal history. And every choice we make contributes to the evidence that will determine how that case is resolved. The rebellion that began when the morning star challenged God's right to rule continues on earth through every human heart that must choose between serving self or serving truth. But the ancient texts promise that this cosmic trial will not continue forever. Soon the evidence will be complete, the verdict will be announced, and the universe will see clearly which system of government produces the better results. What happens next depends on whether humanity chooses to validate God's experiment in freedom and love, or provides the evidence that Lucifer claims proves his accusations against divine character. The forbidden history of creation isn't just about understanding the past. It's about recognizing our role in determining the future of existence itself. The cosmic courtroom is still in session, the evidence is still being presented, and the most important trial in universal history approaches its final resolution. Every human soul becomes a witness, every choice becomes testimony, and every heart becomes a battlefield where the ultimate questions of existence are being decided. The morning star may have fallen from his position of honor, but his influence over human civilization continues as he makes his final arguments in the cosmic trial that will determine whether love or force governs the universe for eternity. The outcome isn't predetermined by divine decree. It will be determined by the evidence presented through the choices that free beings make when faced with the ultimate question of loyalty. The evidence becomes even more chilling when we examine the specific mechanisms that Lucifer's forces use to maintain their grip on human consciousness. The forbidden texts don't just describe a general spiritual war. They provide detailed accounts of sophisticated mind control techniques that would make modern psychological warfare seem primitive by comparison. These ancient manuscripts reveal that fallen angels possess abilities to influence human thought processes that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. They can implant ideas that feel like original thoughts, amplify emotions that serve their purposes, and create what the texts describe as spiritual static that interferes with humanity's natural ability to perceive divine truth. But here's what makes this revelation so disturbing. These influences don't require dramatic supernatural manifestations or obvious demonic possession. They work through perfectly natural psychological processes, making their victims believe they're making independent, rational choices while actually following a carefully orchestrated script. Consider how many of your daily thoughts and decisions might not be as original as you imagine. The ancient texts describe how fallen angels can access and manipulate the same neural pathways that process memory, emotion, and decision-making. They study individual humans with the patience of immortal beings, learning exactly which buttons to push to produce desired behaviors. This explains why certain destructive thought patterns seem to plague humanity, regardless of culture, education, or historical period. The tendency toward pride, the attraction to forbidden pleasures, the desire to control others, the fear of genuine vulnerability. These aren't just natural human weaknesses. They're specifically targeted areas where fallen angels have learned to apply pressure most effectively. The forbidden manuscripts describe how these beings have spent millennia perfecting what they call consciousness manipulation protocols. They know exactly how to present temptations in ways that bypass rational thought and appeal directly to subconscious drives. They understand which memories to activate, which fears to amplify, and which desires to stimulate to produce predictable behavioral responses. Even more disturbing is their ability to coordinate these individual manipulations into mass psychological operations that can influence entire populations simultaneously. The ancient texts describe how fallen angels can create what modern researchers might call social contagion effects, where destructive ideas and behaviors spread through communities like spiritual viruses. This mass manipulation explains how entire civilizations can suddenly embrace practices that previous generations would have recognized as obviously evil. It's not that human nature fundamentally changes from one era to another. It's that the spiritual influences shaping collective consciousness become more sophisticated and pervasive. The forbidden texts reveal that these consciousness manipulation campaigns operate according to carefully planned timelines designed to maximize their impact on the cosmic trial. Each generation faces temptations and challenges specifically calibrated to test different aspects of human nature and divine government. What we're experiencing in our current era represents the culmination of this long-term strategy. The fallen angels have had thousands of years to study human psychology, refine their techniques, and prepare for their final assault on human consciousness. They know this is their last opportunity to gather evidence supporting their accusations against God's character. The intensity and sophistication of modern spiritual warfare reflects this desperate urgency. Never before have humans been subjected to such coordinated attacks on their ability to think clearly, feel authentically, and choose freely. Every form of media, every educational institution, every social structure has been weaponized to serve this final campaign of consciousness control. But the ancient manuscripts also reveal something that provides hope in the face of this overwhelming spiritual assault. These same texts that describe Satan's sophisticated deception techniques also provide detailed instructions for detecting and resisting these influences. The key lies in understanding that fallen angels, despite their superior intelligence and experience, operate within certain limitations. They cannot read human thoughts directly. They cannot force anyone to make choices against their deepest will. And most importantly, they cannot prevent genuine seekers from accessing divine truth if they're willing to pay the price for spiritual clarity. The forbidden texts describe specific spiritual disciplines that can break through the consciousness manipulation that most humans experience without realizing it. These aren't complex religious rituals or esoteric practices. They're simple but profound methods for clearing away the spiritual static that interferes with natural human perception of reality. Prayer, according to these ancient accounts, isn't just communication with God. It's a technology for accessing levels of consciousness that remain beyond the reach of fallen angels. When humans engage in genuine prayer, seeking truth rather than just personal benefits, they connect with sources of knowledge that can expose and neutralize demonic deception. Similarly, meditation on divine truth creates what the texts describe as cognitive sanctuaries, mental spaces that remain protected from external spiritual influence. Regular study of authentic spiritual revelation gradually builds immunity to the lies and half-truths that fallen angels use to corrupt human understanding. But perhaps most importantly, the manuscripts emphasize that choosing to serve others rather than self creates a spiritual frequency that demonic forces cannot match or manipulate. Genuine love generates what the texts call divine resonance, a spiritual state that naturally repels the selfish vibrations that fallen angels use to access human consciousness. This explains why Lucifer's forces work so hard to promote individualism, materialism, and self-centered thinking. These mental states create the spiritual conditions that make consciousness manipulation possible. When humans focus primarily on their own needs, desires, and fears, they become vulnerable to precisely the kinds of influences that the forbidden texts warn about. The cosmic trial that began with Lucifer's rebellion continues to play out in every human mind that must choose between self-serving thoughts and other-serving actions. Every moment of genuine compassion becomes evidence against Satan's claim that creatures given freedom will inevitably choose selfishness. Every act of authentic love demonstrates that divine government produces better results than forced compliance. But the ancient texts warn that this window of opportunity for demonstrating divine truth through human choice is rapidly closing. The evidence-gathering phase of the cosmic trial cannot continue indefinitely. Soon, the accumulated testimony of human behavior throughout history will be evaluated, and a verdict will be rendered that will determine the government of the universe for eternity. The forbidden manuscripts describe specific signs that would indicate when this final phase of the trial was approaching its conclusion. Unprecedented spiritual deception that would be so sophisticated it could fool even sincere truth-seekers who relied on their own understanding. Global crises that would create conditions perfect for the emergence of authoritarian solutions. Technologies that would make possible levels of surveillance and control that previous generations could never have imagined. Yet alongside these signs of Satan's final campaign, the texts describe corresponding indicators of divine preparation for the trial's climax. Spiritual revivals breaking out in unexpected places despite official opposition. Scientific discoveries that would make intelligent design increasingly obvious regardless of institutional resistance. Communication technologies that would enable divine truth to spread rapidly across the globe despite systematic censorship. The convergence of these competing campaigns explains the unprecedented intensity of spiritual warfare in our generation. Both sides recognize that the cosmic trial is approaching its climax. Lucifer knows his time to influence the outcome is running short, while God prepares to demonstrate conclusively that love is more powerful than force. What makes this moment so crucial is that every human being alive today has the opportunity to participate in resolving questions that have implications far beyond their individual existence. The choices we make don't just determine personal destiny. They become evidence in a trial that will influence the character of reality itself for all created beings. The forbidden texts make clear that neutrality isn't possible in this cosmic courtroom. Every thought, every word, every action either supports God's claim that creatures can choose righteousness when given freedom, or provides ammunition for Satan's argument that divine government inevitably leads to chaos and suffering. This understanding transforms how we view every challenge, every temptation, and every opportunity to demonstrate divine character through human choice. We're not just struggling with personal spiritual growth or trying to live moral lives. We're participating in the resolution of the greatest legal case in universal history. The rebellion that shattered heaven's harmony continues on earth through every human heart that must decide whether to trust divine wisdom or rely on selfish understanding. But the ancient texts promise that this cosmic trial will not continue forever. Soon the evidence will be complete, the arguments will be heard, and the universe will witness the final demonstration of which system of government produces the better results. The outcome will not be determined by divine decree or angelic power, but by the accumulated testimony of free beings who chose to align themselves with either love or selfishness when faced with the ultimate test of loyalty. Every human soul becomes a witness. Every choice becomes evidence, and every heart becomes a courtroom where cosmic questions are being resolved. The Morning Star's rebellion may have begun with sophisticated theological arguments and impressive displays of angelic power, but it will be resolved through the simple daily choices of ordinary humans who must decide whether they believe love is stronger than force. The forbidden history of creation isn't just about understanding how evil entered the world. It's about recognizing that we're living witnesses in the trial that will determine how evil leaves the world forever. The cosmic jury is still deliberating, the evidence is still being presented, and the most important verdict in universal history awaits the final testimony of humanity itself. What that testimony reveals will echo through eternity, shaping the character of existence for all created beings who will live in the universe that emerges from this ultimate test of divine government. The forbidden manuscripts reveal something that explains why this cosmic trial has taken so long to reach its conclusion. Time itself operates differently in the spiritual realm than it does in our physical dimension. What seems like endless millennia to human perception represents mere moments in the eternal perspective of beings who exist outside our temporal limitations. But there's a deeper reason for the extended timeline of this cosmic courtroom drama. The ancient texts describe how God deliberately chose to allow the rebellion to run its full course. Not because he was uncertain about the outcome, but because he wanted to provide every possible opportunity for truth to emerge through practical demonstration rather than theoretical argument. Consider the implications. If God had simply destroyed Lucifer and his followers immediately after their rebellion, questions would have remained unanswered for eternity. Other created beings might have wondered whether the rebels had valid points that were silenced through divine force, rather than refuted through evidence. The cosmic community needed to see the full results of both systems of government played out in real time. This explains why evil has been permitted to exist for so long, despite God's obvious power to eliminate it instantly. The continuation of suffering isn't evidence of divine weakness or indifference. It's proof of divine confidence in the ultimate superiority of love-based government over force-based control. God is so certain that his system will prove superior that he's willing to allow the comparison to continue until no reasonable doubt remains. The forbidden texts describe this cosmic patience as one of the most shocking aspects of divine character from the perspective of created beings. Angels who had never experienced anything but immediate divine action suddenly witnessed their Creator, allowing rebellion to continue, corruption to spread, and suffering to persist across countless generations of human history. This divine restraint serves multiple purposes in the cosmic trial. First, it demonstrates that God's government operates through persuasion rather than coercion. He could force compliance at any moment, but he chooses to wait for voluntary submission based on understanding and love. Second, it provides time for every possible argument to be presented and every conceivable strategy to be tested. But perhaps most importantly, this extended timeline allows for the full development of human character under both influences. The ancient manuscripts reveal that humanity serves as the ultimate test case in this cosmic trial. Unlike angels, who were created as fully mature spiritual beings, humans develop gradually through experience and choice. This developmental process makes human testimony particularly valuable in the cosmic courtroom. When an angel chooses to serve God, they do so from a position of complete knowledge and mature spiritual understanding. But when a human makes the same choice despite limited knowledge, corrupted information, and constant pressure to choose otherwise, their decision carries different weight as evidence. The forbidden texts describe how both sides in this cosmic conflict recognized the unique value of human testimony. Lucifer understood that if he could corrupt humanity completely, demonstrating that creatures given freedom would inevitably choose evil, he would win his case against divine government. God understood that if humans could choose righteousness despite their limitations and the rebels' influence, it would provide the most powerful possible vindication of love-based authority. This is why the battle for human souls has been so intense throughout history. Every human choice becomes evidence in a trial that will determine the government of the universe. Every act of selfless love refutes Satan's accusations about the nature of free creatures. Every moment of genuine forgiveness demonstrates that mercy produces better results than vengeance. But the ancient manuscripts reveal that this human testimony phase of the cosmic trial is approaching its predetermined conclusion. The evidence-gathering period cannot continue indefinitely. Soon, the accumulated record of human choices throughout history will be evaluated, and a final verdict will determine which system of government has proven superior through practical demonstration. The texts describe specific markers that would indicate when this transition from evidence-gathering to final judgment was beginning. Global conditions would arise that would force every human being to make clear choices about which authority they recognize as ultimate. The subtle influences and gradual corruptions that have characterized most of human history would give way to obvious, undeniable spiritual warfare. We appear to be entering precisely this phase of the cosmic trial. The spiritual battles that previous generations experienced primarily as internal struggles between good and evil are now manifesting as external conflicts between competing worldviews, political systems, and social structures. The hidden war is becoming visible. This visibility serves the purposes of the cosmic trial by making it impossible for humans to remain neutral or ignorant about the fundamental issues at stake. When the choice between serving self or serving others becomes obvious in every area of life, when the results of both approaches become undeniable, the evidence phase of the trial can reach its conclusion. The forbidden texts warn that this period of obvious choice will be accompanied by unprecedented deception designed to confuse the issues and prevent clear decision-making. Lucifer knows that his final opportunity to influence the trial's outcome is rapidly approaching, and he will use every resource at his disposal to create evidence that supports his accusations against divine government. But the same manuscripts that warn about this final deception also describe divine preparations for ensuring that genuine truth-seekers will not be deceived despite the sophistication of Satan's lies. Those who have learned to distinguish divine influence from demonic manipulation through previous spiritual battles will find their discernment sharpened rather than confused by increased spiritual warfare. The ancient texts reveal that the key to maintaining spiritual clarity during this final phase lies in understanding the fundamental difference between the two systems being tested in the cosmic trial. God's government operates through love, which always seeks the welfare of others, even at personal cost. Satan's government operates through selfishness, which always prioritizes personal benefit even at others' expense. This distinction provides an infallible test for evaluating any spiritual influence, political system, or social movement. Does it encourage people to serve others sacrificially? Or does it promote self-serving behavior? Does it produce genuine peace and unity based on shared principles? Or does it create temporary alliances based on mutual benefit? Does it inspire people to become more loving and truthful? Or does it justify deception and cruelty in service of supposedly good ends? The forbidden manuscripts emphasize that these questions become increasingly important as the cosmic trial approaches its climax. The spiritual forces competing for human loyalty will present their most sophisticated arguments and their most attractive offers. The ability to distinguish between divine and demonic influence will determine not only individual destiny, but also which evidence each person contributes to the final phase of the universal trial. But the ancient texts also reveal something that provides tremendous hope for those who genuinely seek truth despite the confusion of the final spiritual battle. The same divine power that created the universe and sustains all life remains available to guide sincere seekers through even the most sophisticated deception. God has not abandoned his creatures to face this ultimate test alone. The manuscripts describe how divine assistance becomes more powerful as spiritual warfare intensifies. The darker the deception becomes, the brighter divine truth appears to those who seek it genuinely. The more sophisticated Satan's lies become, the more obvious their contradictions appear to those who have learned to think with divine wisdom rather than human reasoning alone. This divine amplification explains why some of history's greatest spiritual breakthroughs have occurred during periods of intense persecution and deception. When external authorities cannot be trusted, when institutional religion becomes corrupted, when social structures promote obvious evil, individual humans are forced to seek truth directly from its divine source. The forbidden texts suggest that we are entering such a period now. The institutions that previous generations relied upon for guidance are being exposed as compromised or incompetent. The authorities that once commanded automatic respect are revealing their true priorities. The systems that promised security and prosperity are demonstrating their inability to deliver on their commitments. This institutional collapse serves the purposes of the cosmic trial by forcing individual humans to make personal decisions about ultimate authority rather than simply following social conventions or religious traditions. When external supports fail, each person must discover for themselves whether divine government provides better guidance than human wisdom. The ancient manuscripts describe this individual testing phase as the culmination of everything the cosmic trial was designed to accomplish. When every human being has had the opportunity to experience both divine and demonic influence personally, when the results of both approaches have been demonstrated clearly through lived experience, when all the arguments have been presented and all the evidence has been gathered, then the cosmic jury will be ready to render their final verdict. That verdict will not be based on theoretical arguments or abstract theological principles. It will be based on the practical results of two competing systems of government, as demonstrated through the choices and experiences of free beings who had the opportunity to test both approaches under real conditions. The rebellion that began when Lucifer questioned God's fitness to rule will end when the evidence clearly demonstrates which system produces the better results for all created beings. The morning star's fall from heaven will be validated or vindicated based on whether his accusations against divine character prove accurate or false through practical demonstration. But until that final verdict is announced, the cosmic trial continues. Every human heart remains a courtroom where ultimate questions are being resolved. Every choice becomes testimony that will influence the government of the universe for eternity. Every soul becomes a witness whose life provides evidence about the relative merits of love versus selfishness as the foundation for cosmic order. The forbidden history of creation isn't just about understanding how evil entered the world or why suffering exists. It's about recognizing that we are living participants in the resolution of cosmic questions that have implications far beyond our individual existence. The choices we make today don't just determine personal destiny. They contribute to evidence that will shape reality for all created beings throughout eternity. The cosmic courtroom remains in session. The evidence continues to accumulate, and the most important trial in universal history approaches its predetermined conclusion. What that conclusion reveals will depend on the testimony that free beings provide through their choices when faced with the ultimate question of loyalty. The morning star's rebellion may have shattered heaven's peace, but its final resolution will establish the foundation for eternal harmony based on demonstrated truth rather than imposed authority. The intensity of spiritual warfare in our generation makes perfect sense when viewed through this cosmic perspective. We are not just experiencing increased evil or social chaos. We are living through the climactic phase of the greatest legal proceeding in universal history, and the evidence we provide through our choices will echo through eternity. The evidence becomes even more disturbing when we examine how this cosmic conspiracy has positioned itself for its final assault on human consciousness. The forbidden texts reveal that what most people interpret as random historical events or natural social developments actually represent carefully orchestrated moves in a cosmic chess game that has been playing out for millennia. Consider the remarkable timing of certain technological breakthroughs that have fundamentally altered human civilization. The printing press appeared precisely when religious authority needed to be challenged to prevent institutional corruption from completely suppressing divine truth. The telegraph and telephone emerged exactly when global communication became necessary for coordinating spiritual awakening across vast distances. The internet arrived at the moment when centralized control of information could no longer serve the purposes of the cosmic trial. But these same technologies that enable unprecedented access to truth also create opportunities for unprecedented deception. The ancient manuscripts warn that Lucifer's forces have been preparing for centuries to exploit these very innovations in their final campaign to corrupt human consciousness on a global scale. The forbidden texts describe how fallen angels have established what they term information warfare protocols designed to use humanity's own communication systems against them. Every platform that enables the spread of divine truth also becomes a vector for sophisticated lies. Every technology that connects sincere seekers also provides access points for demonic manipulation. This explains the contradictory nature of our current information environment. Never before have humans had such easy access to spiritual truth, yet never before have they been subjected to such sophisticated campaigns of deception. The same internet that allows instant access to ancient wisdom also floods consciousness with carefully crafted lies designed to prevent people from recognizing truth when they encounter it. The ancient texts reveal that this information warfare represents the culmination of a strategy that fallen angels have been developing since they first observed human communication patterns. They understand that controlling information flow is more effective than controlling individual minds, because people will voluntarily accept ideas that seem to come from trusted sources or appear to represent consensus opinion. But the manuscripts describe something even more sinister about the current phase of this cosmic conflict. The fallen angels are no longer content to simply influence human thinking through subtle manipulation. They are actively working to merge human consciousness with artificial intelligence systems that they can control directly. This technological integration isn't being presented as spiritual warfare, of course. It's being marketed as human enhancement, medical necessity, or inevitable progress. But the forbidden texts warn that these systems are being designed to bypass the natural spiritual defenses that protect human consciousness from direct demonic control. When humans become dependent on artificial intelligence for decision-making, when their thoughts are augmented by computer systems, when their emotions are regulated by digital interfaces, they create pathways for external control that their ancestors never faced. The ancient manuscripts describe this as the ultimate violation of human spiritual autonomy. Yet the same texts that warn about this technological enslavement also reveal that divine forces have been preparing countermeasures that will ensure genuine truth seekers are not deceived by even these sophisticated deceptions. The cosmic trial requires that every human being have access to real choice, which means that no deception can be so complete that sincere seekers cannot find their way to truth. The forbidden manuscripts describe how divine protection operates through what they call spiritual resonance frequencies. When humans align their consciousness with divine principles through genuine prayer, selfless service, and authentic love, they generate spiritual vibrations that demonic forces cannot match or manipulate. This explains why certain people seem immune to deceptions that fool millions of others. It's not that they possess superior intelligence or better information. They have learned to tune their consciousness to spiritual frequencies that remain beyond the reach of fallen angels, regardless of how sophisticated their technological tools become. The ancient texts emphasize that this spiritual tuning requires deliberate effort and consistent practice. It's not enough to intellectually understand divine principles. Humans must actively align their daily choices with these principles until their entire being resonates with divine character, rather than selfish impulses. This process of spiritual alignment becomes increasingly crucial as the cosmic trial approaches its conclusion. The final phase of evidence gathering will test whether humans can maintain connection to divine truth, even when subjected to unprecedented pressure to conform to systems that promote spiritual blindness. The forbidden texts describe how this ultimate test will present itself through global crises that seem to require surrendering individual spiritual autonomy in exchange for collective security and survival. Humans will be told that independent thinking is dangerous, that personal spiritual experience is unreliable, and that submission to centralized authority is the only path to safety and prosperity. But those who have learned to distinguish divine influence from demonic manipulation will recognize these arguments as variations of the same lies that Lucifer used in his original rebellion against divine government. The claim that authority must be centralized to maintain order. The assertion that individual freedom leads inevitably to chaos. The promise that surrendering autonomy will result in greater security and happiness. The cosmic trial was designed specifically to test these claims through practical demonstration. Has divine government, which operates through love and respects individual freedom, produced better results than authoritarian control? Do creatures given genuine choice choose righteousness or corruption? Is mercy more effective than force in maintaining cosmic order? The evidence that humanity provides through its response to these final tests will answer these questions definitively. If humans choose to surrender their spiritual autonomy in exchange for promised security, they validate Lucifer's argument that creatures cannot handle freedom responsibly. If they choose to maintain their connection to divine truth despite pressure to conform, they demonstrate that God's system of government produces beings who can be trusted with freedom. But the ancient manuscripts reveal that this choice will not be as simple as choosing between obvious good and obvious evil. The final deceptions will be presented as necessary responses to genuine problems. The systems of control will promise to solve real crises. The authorities demanding submission will appear to offer legitimate solutions to desperate situations. This is why the forbidden texts emphasize the importance of understanding the fundamental principles underlying the cosmic trial, rather than simply trying to identify specific events or individuals to avoid. The ability to discern divine influence from demonic manipulation must be based on understanding the character differences between the two systems of government being tested. Divine government always operates through principles that respect the dignity and freedom of created beings. It seeks to develop character through experience and choice, rather than enforcing compliance through fear and punishment. It produces unity through shared love of truth rather than conformity through shared fear of authority. Demonic government operates through exactly opposite principles. It concentrates power in centralized authorities. It demands compliance without understanding. It creates unity through shared fear of external threats, rather than shared commitment to truth and righteousness. It promises security in exchange for freedom and prosperity in exchange for moral compromise. The ancient texts warn that these fundamental differences will become increasingly obvious as the cosmic trial reaches its climax. The choice between divine and demonic authority will no longer be hidden behind religious language or political rhetoric. It will be presented as a clear decision about what kind of universe created beings want to inhabit. Do you want to live in a reality governed by love, where freedom is preserved even at the cost of temporary suffering, where character is developed through experience rather than enforced through fear? Or do you prefer a universe governed by force, where security is guaranteed through submission, where order is maintained through surveillance and control? The forbidden manuscripts make clear that this choice cannot be avoided indefinitely. The cosmic trial was never intended to continue forever. Soon the evidence-gathering phase will be complete. The final arguments will be presented, and every created being will witness the demonstration of which system produces the better results. But until that moment arrives, the battle for human consciousness continues with unprecedented intensity. Every thought becomes a battlefield where cosmic principles are tested. Every choice becomes testimony that will influence the government of the universe. Every heart becomes a courtroom where the character of existence itself is being determined. The ancient texts reveal that those who understand the true nature of this cosmic conflict possess a tremendous advantage in navigating the final spiritual battles. When you recognize that current events are not random chaos, but carefully orchestrated moves in a cosmic legal proceeding, when you understand that your choices contribute evidence to a trial that will determine eternal reality, when you realize that divine truth remains accessible despite sophisticated deception campaigns, you can participate consciously in resolving the greatest questions in universal history. The rebellion that began when the morning star challenged God's fitness to rule continues through every human heart that must choose between serving self or serving truth. But the ancient prophecies promise that this cosmic trial will not continue forever. Soon the accumulated evidence of how free beings respond when given genuine choice will be evaluated, and a verdict will be announced that will echo through eternity. What that verdict reveals will depend on whether humanity demonstrates that creatures given freedom can choose righteousness despite pressure to choose otherwise. That love is more powerful than force in governing conscious beings, and that divine character produces better results than selfish ambition in creating sustainable cosmic order. The forbidden history of creation isn't just about understanding how evil entered the world or why spiritual warfare exists. It's about recognizing that we are living witnesses in the final phase of the greatest legal case in universal history. Every choice we make either supports or undermines the system of government that will rule reality for all created beings throughout eternity. The cosmic courtroom remains in session, but the evidence-gathering phase approaches its predetermined conclusion. Soon the final arguments will be heard, the ultimate demonstrations will be completed, and the universe will witness the resolution of questions that have shaped existence since the dawn of time. The morning stars fall from heaven, set in motion a cosmic drama that has been building toward this climactic moment for millennia. What happens next will be determined by the testimony that free beings provide through their choices when faced with the ultimate test of loyalty. The outcome will not be decided by force or manipulation, but by the accumulated evidence of which system of government actually works better in practice. And in that evidence, your life, your choices, and your response to the final spiritual battles of this cosmic age will play a part in determining how the greatest story ever told finally comes to its conclusion. The forbidden manuscripts contain one final revelation that explains why this cosmic trial has been allowed to reach such intensity in our generation. The ancient texts describe a principle they call the convergence of witnesses, where the testimonies of all previous generations combine with the choices of the final generation to provide complete evidence about the relative merits of divine versus demonic government. Every human being who has ever lived has contributed something to this cosmic case study. Every choice for righteousness or selfishness, every response to divine invitation or demonic temptation, every demonstration of love or hatred has been carefully recorded as evidence in the ultimate legal proceeding. But the final generation bears unique responsibility because their choices will complete the evidence and trigger the trial's conclusion. This explains both the unprecedented opportunities and the overwhelming challenges facing humanity today. Never before have humans had access to so much accumulated wisdom from previous generations. Never before have the results of both systems of government been so clearly demonstrated through historical experience. Never before have the tools for spiritual discernment been so readily available to those who genuinely seek truth. Yet never before have the forces of deception been so sophisticated, the pressure to conform so intense, or the consequences of wrong choices so far-reaching. The final generation doesn't just choose for themselves. Their collective testimony will influence the government of the universe for all created beings throughout eternity. The ancient texts warn that this tremendous responsibility will create unprecedented spiritual warfare as both sides in the cosmic conflict make their final appeals for human loyalty. But they also promise that those who choose to align with divine truth will discover capabilities and insights that previous generations could never access. The same cosmic forces that enable unprecedented deception also make possible unprecedented revelation for those who seek it genuinely. The same spiritual intensity that threatens to overwhelm the unprepared also empowers those who have learned to draw strength from divine sources rather than relying on human wisdom alone. The forbidden history of creation reaches its climax in our generation because we are the final witnesses in the greatest trial ever conducted. The morning star's rebellion against divine authority continues through every human heart that must choose between serving self or serving others. But the ancient promises assure us that this cosmic conflict will not continue forever. Soon the evidence will be complete, the arguments will be concluded, and the universe will witness the final demonstration of whether love or force provides the better foundation for eternal government. What that demonstration reveals will depend on the choices that free beings make when faced with the ultimate question of loyalty in the closing moments of the cosmic trial that began when Lucifer first challenged the character of God. The weight of this revelation becomes even more staggering when we examine how the final phase of this cosmic trial is designed to expose the deepest truths about the nature of reality itself. The forbidden texts reveal that we are not simply witnessing the conclusion of a legal case that began with Lucifer's rebellion. We are participating in the ultimate demonstration of what happens when the fundamental forces of existence clash in their purest forms. Consider what the ancient manuscripts describe as the final polarization. Throughout most of human history, the lines between good and evil have been blurred by circumstances, cultural conditioning and limited understanding. People could serve Satan's purposes while believing they were doing good. They could resist divine truth while thinking they were being rational. The subtle nature of spiritual warfare allowed for confusion, mixed motives, and gradual corruption. But the forbidden texts warn that this era of spiritual ambiguity is rapidly ending. The final phase of the cosmic trial requires that every created being see clearly what they are choosing between. The masks must come off. The hidden agendas must be exposed. The true nature of both systems of government must be revealed in ways that eliminate all possibility of confusion or self-deception. This explains the intensity of current global events when viewed through the lens of cosmic trial, rather than mere human politics or social change. Every crisis, every conflict, every moment of chaos serves to strip away the pretenses and reveal the fundamental principles that different groups actually serve. When pressure increases, true character emerges. When comfort disappears, real priorities become visible. When security vanishes, genuine faith is distinguished from mere religious profession. The ancient texts describe this process as divine winnowing, where external circumstances create conditions that separate wheat from chaff, gold from dross, authentic disciples from mere followers. But this winnowing serves the purposes of the cosmic trial by ensuring that the final evidence is pure, uncontaminated by mixed motives or confused understanding. Those who truly serve divine principles will demonstrate love, mercy, and self-sacrifice, even when doing so costs them everything. Those who actually serve selfish principles will reveal hatred, cruelty, and self-preservation, even when they claim to represent righteousness. The pressure of final events will make these differences impossible to hide or misinterpret. But the forbidden manuscripts reveal something even more profound about what this final demonstration will accomplish. The cosmic trial was never just about resolving questions for the benefit of created beings who might wonder about divine justice. It was designed to settle these questions in the mind of God Himself. This might sound shocking to those who assume divine omniscience means God knows everything in advance with absolute certainty. But the ancient texts suggest that genuine love requires real freedom. And real freedom means that outcomes cannot be predetermined without destroying the authenticity of choice itself. Even God cannot know with absolute certainty what free beings will choose until they actually make their choices under real conditions. This explains why the cosmic trial has been allowed to continue for so long and reach such intensity. God needed to know, with the certainty that comes only from actual experience rather than theoretical possibility, whether created beings given genuine freedom would choose love or selfishness when faced with ultimate tests. The trial provides this knowledge through practical demonstration rather than abstract speculation. The implications are staggering. The choices that humans make during the final phase of this cosmic trial don't just determine their individual destinies or even provide evidence for other created beings. They actually inform God's own understanding of what kinds of beings He has created and what kinds of government will work best for their eternal happiness and development. When the trial concludes and the evidence is evaluated, God will possess complete knowledge, gained through actual experience, of how free beings respond to both divine and demonic influence under every possible condition. This knowledge will form the basis for establishing eternal government that takes into account the demonstrated realities of created nature rather than just theoretical ideals. The forbidden texts reveal that this is why the stakes of current spiritual battles are so incredibly high. We are not just fighting for our own souls, or even for the future of human civilization. We are participating in God's own learning process about the nature of the beings He has created and the kinds of conditions that will promote their eternal flourishing. Every choice for righteousness provides God with evidence that creatures can indeed choose good when given genuine freedom. Every demonstration of selfless love proves that divine character can be reproduced in created beings without coercion or manipulation. Every moment of authentic worship validates the decision to create beings capable of voluntary relationship rather than programmed compliance. Conversely, every choice for evil provides evidence about the destructive nature of selfishness when given free expression. Every act of cruelty demonstrates where rebellion against divine principles ultimately leads. Every moment of hatred or revenge shows the logical outcome of the system that Lucifer has been promoting since his original rebellion. But here's what makes this cosmic learning process so crucial for understanding current events. The ancient texts reveal that God's knowledge gained through the trial will determine not just how He governs in the future, but how He deals with evil in the present. The continuation of the trial requires that both systems be allowed to demonstrate their full potential through practical application. This means that evil must be permitted to reach its ultimate expression, just as good must be allowed to manifest its highest possibilities. The cosmic trial cannot reach its conclusion until both love and selfishness have been tested under the most extreme conditions possible. Only then will the evidence be complete enough to support eternal decisions about cosmic government. This explains why the world seems to be spiraling toward unprecedented darkness at the same time that unprecedented light is breaking forth among those who genuinely seek divine truth. Both processes are necessary for completing the evidence that the cosmic trial requires. The wheat and the tares must grow together until the harvest, when their true nature becomes unmistakably clear. The forbidden manuscripts describe how this final demonstration will unfold through what they call the revelation of hidden things. Every secret agenda will be exposed. Every concealed motive will be revealed. Every disguised allegiance will be unmasked. The time for pretense and deception will end because the trial requires complete honesty about what different choices actually produce. Those who have been serving Satan while claiming to serve God will be forced to reveal their true loyalties through their actions when pressure makes neutrality impossible. Those who have been seeking divine truth despite opposition and misunderstanding will demonstrate their authentic commitment through their choices when maintaining that commitment costs them everything. This revelation process serves multiple purposes in the cosmic trial. It ensures that the final evidence is pure and uncontaminated by false pretenses. It provides clear demonstrations of what each system of government actually produces when followed to its logical conclusion. And it gives every created being the opportunity to see clearly what they are choosing between before making their final decision. But the ancient texts warn that this revelation process will be accompanied by unprecedented deception designed to confuse the issues even as they are being clarified. Lucifer knows that his final opportunity to influence the trial's outcome is rapidly approaching, and he will use every resource at his disposal to create false evidence that supports his accusations against divine character. The sophistication of these final deceptions will surpass anything that previous generations have faced. They will appear to offer genuine solutions to real problems. They will seem to promote authentic peace, security, and prosperity. They will claim to represent the highest ideals of justice, mercy, and love. Only those who have learned to distinguish divine influence from demonic manipulation through previous spiritual battles will be able to see through these ultimate lies. Yet the same manuscripts that warn about this final deception also reveal that divine truth will shine with corresponding brightness for those who genuinely seek it. The darker the lies become, the more obvious becomes their contrast with authentic light. The more sophisticated the deceptions become, the more apparent become their contradictions with observable reality. This divine amplification ensures that the cosmic trial maintains its essential character as a test of genuine choice rather than a contest of deceptive power. No matter how sophisticated Satan's lies become, sincere seekers of truth will still be able to find and follow divine guidance. The trial's integrity depends on every created being having access to real choice, based on accurate information about the consequences of different decisions. The forbidden texts describe how this access to divine truth operates through what they call spiritual resonance amplification. When humans align their consciousness with divine principles through authentic prayer, selfless service, and genuine love, their ability to perceive truth becomes supernaturally enhanced. They develop what the manuscripts describe as prophetic discernment that enables them to see through deceptions that fool millions of others. This explains why certain individuals seem to possess uncanny insight into the spiritual dimensions of current events, while others remain completely blind to what appears obvious to discerning observers. The difference isn't intelligence, education, or access to information. It's spiritual alignment that determines how clearly someone can perceive the cosmic realities underlying visible circumstances. But the ancient texts emphasize that this enhanced discernment requires active cultivation rather than passive reception. Humans must deliberately choose to seek divine truth, align their daily choices with divine principles, and maintain spiritual disciplines that keep their consciousness tuned to divine frequencies rather than demonic static. This cultivation process becomes increasingly crucial as the cosmic trial approaches its climax. The final spiritual battles will test whether humans can maintain their connection to divine truth even when subjected to the most sophisticated deception campaigns in the history of the universe. Those who have learned to draw their understanding from divine sources rather than human institutions will possess the clarity needed to navigate these ultimate challenges. The forbidden manuscripts reveal that the successful completion of this spiritual preparation will enable the final generation to serve as living demonstrations of divine government in action. Their lives will become practical examples of what creatures can become when they choose to align themselves completely with divine principles despite external pressure to conform to selfish systems. These demonstrations will provide the final evidence needed to conclude the cosmic trial. When created beings show that they can choose righteousness despite overwhelming temptation, when they demonstrate love despite hatred directed toward them, when they maintain faith despite circumstances that seem to prove God has abandoned them, they validate every claim that divine government has made about the potential of free creatures. But the ancient texts also warn that serving as this kind of evidence requires a level of spiritual maturity that most humans have never developed. The final witnesses in the cosmic trial must be prepared to stand for divine truth, even when doing so costs them everything they value in earthly terms. They must love divine principles more than personal comfort, truth more than popular acceptance, eternal values more than temporary advantages. This preparation cannot be accomplished through last-minute spiritual cramming or emergency religious conversion. It requires years of deliberate character development, consistent choice-making that prioritizes divine will over selfish desires, and gradual alignment of consciousness with divine frequency through regular spiritual discipline and practice. The forbidden history of creation reaches its climax through the choices that the final generation makes when faced with these ultimate tests of loyalty. The morning star's rebellion against divine authority will be finally resolved when the evidence clearly demonstrates which system of government actually works better for promoting the eternal happiness and development of free creatures. But that resolution depends on whether enough humans choose to demonstrate divine character under the most challenging conditions possible, providing the evidence God needs to establish eternal government based on demonstrated truth rather than theoretical possibility. The cosmic trial that began in heaven's courts will end on earth through the testimony of human lives that prove love is indeed more powerful than force in governing the universe. The ancient texts promise that this testimony will be provided, that the trial will reach its intended conclusion, and that the universe will witness the final vindication of divine character through the choices of created beings who freely choose to reflect that character despite every pressure to do otherwise. But whether any individual participates in providing that testimony depends on choices that must be made while the trial is still in session, and the outcome still depends on the evidence that free beings choose to provide through their response to ultimate spiritual challenges. The cosmic courtroom remains open, the final arguments are being prepared, and the most important verdict in universal history awaits the completion of evidence that will determine how existence itself is governed throughout eternity. What that evidence reveals will echo through endless ages, shaping reality for all created beings based on what the final generation demonstrates about the true nature and potential of creatures given genuine freedom to choose their ultimate loyalty. The weight of this cosmic revelation becomes even more profound when we examine what the ancient texts reveal about the specific mechanisms through which this final evidence will be gathered and evaluated. The forbidden manuscripts describe something they call the convergence point, a moment in cosmic history when all the accumulated testimony from every generation of created beings reaches critical mass and triggers the trial's conclusion. This convergence isn't simply about reaching a predetermined number of witnesses or waiting for a specific date on some celestial calendar. The ancient texts reveal that it's about achieving what they term evidential completeness, where every possible argument has been tested, every conceivable scenario has played out, and every aspect of both divine and demonic government has been demonstrated under real conditions. Consider the staggering scope of what this means. Every human civilization that has ever existed has contributed data to this cosmic experiment. The rise and fall of empires, the development and corruption of religions, the advancement and misuse of technology, the emergence of moral systems and their eventual breakdown. All of these historical patterns have been carefully observed and recorded as evidence in the ultimate legal proceeding. But the forbidden texts reveal that our current generation faces something unprecedented in this long history of evidence gathering. We are the first humans to live with complete access to the accumulated testimony of all previous generations. Through modern communication and information systems, we can study the results of every experiment in human government, every attempt at creating perfect societies, every religious system that has claimed divine authority. This comprehensive access to historical evidence serves a crucial purpose in the cosmic trial's final phase. It eliminates the possibility that humans might make wrong choices simply because they lacked information about the consequences of different approaches to life and government. When the trial concludes, no created being will be able to claim they chose poorly because they didn't understand what their choices would produce. The ancient manuscripts describe how this informational completeness creates what they call the condition of informed consent. Every human being alive during the final phase of the trial has access to enough evidence to make genuinely informed decisions about which system of government they want to support through their choices and allegiance. Those who choose to serve selfish principles, despite knowing where such choices lead throughout history, demonstrate that their preference for evil is genuine rather than based on ignorance or deception. Those who choose to serve divine principles despite the cost demonstrate that their love for righteousness is authentic, rather than motivated by fear or expectation of reward. But the forbidden texts warn that this condition of informed consent will be accompanied by unprecedented pressure to choose poorly despite having access to complete information. The forces of evil will work harder than ever to convince humans to ignore the lessons of history, to believe that they can somehow achieve different results by following the same destructive patterns that have failed in every previous generation. This explains the seemingly irrational nature of many current global trends. When you examine them through the lens of cosmic trial, behaviors that appear insane from a purely human perspective make perfect sense as final attempts to validate systems of government that historical evidence has already proven destructive. The ancient texts describe how these final validation attempts will take the form of what they call ultimate experiments in human government. Every form of political, economic, and social organization that has ever been tried will be attempted again, but under conditions that make their true nature and inevitable outcomes more obvious than ever before. Systems based on centralized control will demonstrate their inherent tendency toward tyranny and oppression. Approaches that prioritize material prosperity over spiritual development will reveal their ultimate emptiness and corruption. Methods that promise security through surrendering freedom will show their inevitable progression toward total slavery. But simultaneously, the manuscripts reveal that individuals and communities that organize themselves according to divine principles will demonstrate unprecedented prosperity, harmony, and genuine security. Their success will provide clear contrast with the failure of systems based on selfish principles, making the choice between different approaches to life and government unmistakably obvious. This stark contrast serves the cosmic trial by eliminating any possibility of confusion about which system works better. When the evidence is complete and the final arguments are presented, every created being will be able to see clearly what different choices actually produce when followed to their logical conclusions. The forbidden texts reveal that this clarity is essential because the trial's conclusion will result in permanent cosmic decisions that cannot be reversed or modified based on later experience. Once the evidence demonstrates which system of government works better, that system will be established as the eternal foundation for cosmic order throughout the universe. This permanence explains why the trial has been allowed to continue for so long and reach such intensity. God cannot afford to make eternal decisions based on incomplete evidence or theoretical assumptions. The government that emerges from this cosmic trial must be based on demonstrated truth that has been tested under every conceivable condition. But the ancient manuscripts also reveal something that provides tremendous hope for those who feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of what's at stake in current spiritual battles. The same divine wisdom that designed this cosmic trial also provided everything necessary for sincere truth seekers to make correct choices despite the sophistication of final deceptions. The texts describe how divine protection operates through what they call truth resonance fields. When humans align their consciousness with divine principles through authentic prayer, selfless service, and genuine love, they generate spiritual frequencies that remain beyond the reach of demonic manipulation, regardless of how advanced the deception technologies become. This spiritual protection isn't automatic or unconditional. It requires active cooperation with divine influence through daily choices that prioritize truth over comfort, others' welfare over personal advantage, and eternal values over temporary benefits. But for those willing to pay this price, the protection is absolute and unbreachable. The forbidden manuscripts describe specific disciplines and practices that can establish and maintain these protective spiritual frequencies. Regular meditation on divine truth creates mental sanctuaries that remain immune to external manipulation. Consistent acts of selfless service generate what the texts call love shields that deflect demonic attacks. Authentic worship establishes direct communication channels with divine sources that provide guidance and strength during the most challenging spiritual battles. These spiritual technologies, according to the ancient texts, become more powerful as spiritual warfare intensifies. The same cosmic forces that enable unprecedented deception also amplify the effectiveness of genuine spiritual disciplines for those who employ them consistently. The darker the spiritual darkness becomes, the brighter divine light appears to those who seek it genuinely. This divine amplification ensures that the cosmic trial maintains its essential character as a test of genuine choice, rather than a contest of superior power or more sophisticated deception. No matter how advanced Satan's lies become, sincere seekers of truth will always have access to divine guidance that enables them to distinguish reality from illusion. But the ancient texts emphasize that accessing this guidance requires more than intellectual understanding or emotional commitment. It demands what they call total spiritual alignment, where every aspect of a person's life reflects their allegiance to divine principles rather than selfish desires. This alignment cannot be achieved through partial commitment or occasional spiritual effort. It requires what the forbidden manuscripts describe as complete surrender of selfish will to divine authority, not through forced submission, but through voluntary recognition that divine wisdom produces better results than human reasoning in every area of life. The texts reveal that achieving this level of spiritual alignment transforms humans into what they call transparent beings, individuals whose thoughts, motivations, and actions perfectly reflect divine character without any mixture of selfish contamination. These transparent beings become living demonstrations of what creatures can become when they choose complete cooperation with divine government. Their lives provide the most powerful possible evidence in the cosmic trial, because they prove that created beings can indeed reflect divine character voluntarily, rather than through coercion or programming. Every act of genuine love, every moment of authentic compassion, every choice to serve others despite personal cost, validates God's claim that free creatures can choose righteousness when given genuine freedom. But the ancient manuscripts warn that becoming this kind of evidence requires willingness to endure spiritual battles that test every aspect of character and commitment. The forces of evil will focus their most sophisticated attacks on those who pose the greatest threat to their case against divine government. These attacks won't necessarily take the form of dramatic supernatural manifestations. More often, they will appear as reasonable arguments for compromise, attractive opportunities that require moral flexibility, or social pressures that make maintaining spiritual integrity seem unnecessarily difficult or costly. The forbidden texts describe how these subtle temptations often prove more dangerous than obvious persecutions because they appeal to natural human desires for acceptance, security, and comfort. It's easier to stand firm against dramatic evil than to resist gradual corruption that promises to make life easier or more pleasant. Yet the same manuscripts that warn about these sophisticated temptations also reveal that those who learn to recognize and resist them develop what they call spiritual immunity, the ability to detect and neutralize demonic influences automatically without conscious effort. This immunity develops through repeated successful resistance to temptation, gradually building strength that makes future spiritual battles easier rather than harder. The ancient texts promise that humans who achieve this level of spiritual development will not only survive the final phase of the cosmic trial, but will actively contribute to its successful resolution. Their lives will become practical demonstrations of divine government in action, providing the evidence God needs to establish eternal cosmic order based on demonstrated truth rather than theoretical possibility. These final witnesses, according to the forbidden manuscripts, will serve as bridges between the current age of spiritual warfare and the coming era of eternal peace. Their successful demonstration of divine character under ultimate testing conditions will validate every promise that God has ever made about the potential of created beings who choose complete cooperation with divine will. But the texts also reveal that the number of these final witnesses doesn't need to be large to accomplish their cosmic purpose. Just as one person's choice to rebel could introduce chaos into a perfect universe, a relatively small number of people choosing complete alignment with divine truth can provide sufficient evidence to validate God's system of government for eternity. This explains why the cosmic trial doesn't require every human being to achieve perfect spiritual development before it can reach its conclusion. It only requires enough transparent witnesses to demonstrate conclusively that divine government works when creatures choose genuine cooperation rather than forced compliance. The forbidden history of creation approaches its climax through the development of these final witnesses who will complete the evidence needed to resolve the cosmic trial. The morning star's rebellion against divine authority will be definitively answered when created beings prove through their voluntary choices that love is indeed more powerful than force in governing free creatures. But whether any individual becomes part of this final testimony depends on choices that must be made while the trial is still in session, and the outcome still depends on the evidence that free beings provide through their response to ultimate spiritual challenges. The cosmic courtroom remains open, but the time for presenting evidence approaches its predetermined limit. What happens when that limit is reached will determine not just individual destinies, but the character of existence itself for all created beings throughout eternity. The rebellion that shattered heaven's harmony will finally be resolved through the testimony of earthly witnesses who prove that creatures given genuine freedom can choose to reflect divine character despite every pressure to do otherwise. The ancient texts promise this testimony will be provided and the trial will reach its intended conclusion. But they also make clear that participation in providing this testimony requires choices that transform ordinary humans into extraordinary demonstrations of what created beings can become when they choose complete alignment with divine truth and love. The cosmic drama that began when Lucifer first questioned God's fitness to rule approaches its final act. What that conclusion reveals about the nature of good and evil, the power of genuine love, and the ultimate destiny of free creatures will echo through endless ages, establishing the foundation for cosmic government based on demonstrated truth rather than imposed authority. The morning star may have fallen from his position of honor, but his rebellion set in motion events that will ultimately vindicate divine character more completely than would have been possible without the contrast his opposition provided. The cosmic trial he demanded will conclude with evidence that settles forever the questions he raised about the nature and effectiveness of love-based government. And in that final resolution, Every human being who ever lived will have contributed something to the evidence that determines how the universe will be governed throughout eternity. The choices we make today don't just shape individual destiny. They participate in resolving the ultimate questions of existence itself and establishing the principles that will guide cosmic order forever.